Is the Money in the Bank ruined after what we saw at Hell in the Cell? Is the Money in the Bank ruined?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily ruined. I think that they really kind of squandered an opportunity to put Braun Strowman over Roman and become the Universal Champion. But again, going back when Strowman first won the Money in the Bank, I was critical of him winning. I think it would have been better suited if somebody had won it and cashed in either successfully or unsuccessfully. Just because of he's supposed to be this big monster who beats everybody up, and having him cash in the way he was cashing in, I respect that, but at the same time, it kind of loses its whole importance. So I don't think it's necessarily ruined, but I think they really kind of squandered the whole Braun Strowman having the Money in the Bank and kind of wasted it on him. I think it would have been better suited on another guy.
Well, I'm going to say that it is ruined. It is ruined. You got... This is supposed to be a catapult to the next big star in WWE.
I agree with that.
CM Punk won it twice. We had Rob Van Dam win it, where he finally became a main event star in WWE. You have Jack Swagger, who was supposed to be catapulted to the main event with this thing. Alberto Del Rio. These guys, this is supposed to be their catapult into the main event by winning a championship. And with Baron Corbin losing it last year, trying to do the chicken crap heel thing last year and actually failed to do so.
Shit.
And this year you have Braun Strowman trying to do a babyface type of cash in where he's going to announce it ahead of time.
Right.
And then still loses. And I don't know if it's really like a protection of Braun or a protection of Roman, the way they finished the ending. But I think at the end of the day, what does this do for Braun Strowman? Nothing.
No, absolutely nothing. And that's why I was so critical of him even having it. It would have been all the guys you just mentioned, whether it was Jack Swagger, Alberto Del Rio, Dolph Ziggler. There's been some really memorable cash-ins where it did kind of elevate those guys to the next level. And then there's other people who it didn't necessarily elevate them to that level. But at the very least, when somebody's going to cash in, the crowd automatically buys into it because they think they're going to see something epic. The one thing I will say is, even though they've had 2 back-to-back failed cash-ins, you do have to mix in some cash-ins that are failed, because if you go to the well one too many times, or you have all these cash-ins and they're all successful, it just becomes another thing that people are going to expect. And
I agree with that.
It loses something, and it's not as meaningful.
I agree with that, but here's the problem, though. You did it in back-to-back years. And with guys that I think Vince has at least some kind of hope for. He likes Baron Corbin. He likes Braun Strowman. And they're kind of in the main event picture right now. But with a failed cash-in for both of them, I think this, especially with Braun Strowman, I think if it was a successful cash-in and he ended up beating Roman Reigns at Hell in a Cell, he would have been catapulted easily as the top guy.
But he didn't need the Money in the Bank to do that. He could beat even the way it was presented, and I keep saying this. This is the problem I have with Braun Strowman having the Money in the Bank. He doesn't need anything to get him to that next level besides just the Universal Championship. If he's going over Roman Reigns or he's going over Brock Lesnar, he doesn't need the Money in the Bank cash in to solidify his spot as a top performer.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, going back to my earlier point, so let's say, just for example, you said you don't like the fact that there's been 2 failed cash-ins back-to-back years. Now, I know a lot of wrestling fans, they're not as patient with anything. They don't like letting things develop. But just imagine for the next successful cash-in. Let's assume it's next year. And it's somebody
it has to be next year.
Even if it's not, let's just pretend for the sake of the conversation that it's somebody like Cien Almas. Let's say he cashes in, and they build off the fact that there's been 2 unsuccessful cash-ins, and now he's the guy that cashes in, he wins the title. it means more. You have to have some of those failed cash-ins in order for that still to feel special, because if it's going to be where everybody is cashing in consistently and winning the title, it's just going to be one of those things that loses it makes it just another part of the show.
But
And it
that's part of
loses
the
it.
storyline where whoever has that money in the bank, they're guaranteed a championship.
No, they're guaranteed a championship
But
opportunity.
I understand that. But with the amount of cash-ins that have been successful, you talk about the 3 that failed before this.
Mm-hmm.
John Cena was a predetermined cash-in.
Yep.
Damian Sandow, predetermined cash-in. And Baron Corbin last year was the first that was unsuccessful in the predetermined way.
Mr. Anderson lost it to who? Was it?
So he lost it to Edge.
And then Edge successfully cashed in.
Right.
Right. But I don't know. That's just my take on it. I feel like, you have to have some of the failed cash-ins, and I understand where you're coming from. But if they have all these cash-ins that are successful back-to-back years, it just becomes another part of the show that people are going to expect to happen. Like you're saying right now, well, people are expecting the championship to change hands, and it always makes for a cool moment. One of my most favorite Raw memories in recent memory is when Dolph Ziggler cashed in. The crowd went absolutely insane when he cashed in because he was so over at that time. As soon as his music hit, he came out, he cashed in. It was great. And you always have that when somebody has the money in the bank. There's always going to be that opportunity. Is he going to come out? Are they going to cash in? And it makes for a cool moment. But, you have to have some failed cash-ins.
Now, this could be, they've done everything else so far. Successful cash-ins, the heelish type of cash-in that was failed, the predetermined cash-in that failed.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing they haven't done yet was let the contract expire.
Yeah.
If they do something like that, then maybe I could say we could bring some legitimacy into it, because then you could actually put a storyline in where, okay, he's attempted and could just never actually get the cash in initiated, and then time runs out. And then that could be the feud. Okay, who keeps costing him to cash in?
Yeah.
That, I think, might help bring some credibility back into it. Whereas, you have a fail. Now, next year, it's one of those like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand it has to happen where the cash-in has to fail at some point where, at a point it's going to keep, okay, successful. Then it's like, all right, whoever has it is the next champion.
Right.
Totally okay with that. But what happens now if it's 3 years in a row that there's a failed cash-in? Now it's like, all right, what's the point of this thing now?
Yeah, but I think they're also probably protecting themselves as well, because of the guys you mentioned earlier, Alberto Del Rio, no longer in the WWE. Jack Swagger, no longer in the WWE. And they always talk about, well, does the belt make the wrestler? Does the wrestler make the belt? If you have a cash-in just for the sake of changing the title over to somebody else, especially if they're not ready for it, well, okay, is that good for their career, or does that set them back? If they win the belt and all of a sudden, they're not over with the fans and they have to take the belt off them immediately, that does more harm than it does good. So what's the point of even having the cash in at that point?
Well, that's a different issue with WWE, I think, because right now you have a heavyweight champion on Raw and a heavyweight champion on SmackDown. So with Money in the Bank, having the 2 separate brands, you could put the Money in Bank on one brand and he wins. Mm-hmm. So it basically, let's say a SmackDown guy wins next year and it's, Kevin Owens moves over to SmackDown. Mm-hmm. Let's just say hypothetical, and he wins. Now he can cash in on someone and it's successful, and this could be his test as a main top guy. Mm-hmm. They do this all the time. This is what the Intercontinental Championship used to be.
Yeah.
This is what the World Heavyweight Champion used to be when they had the 2 belts. This is what the WWE Champion is now. The Universal Champion is the top guy. That's why Roman Reigns has it. That's why AJ Styles is the WWE Champion, because that's the test. If he can have a lengthy reign where Vince is impressed with his title reign, he will move over to Raw and eventually become a Universal Champion as the top guy.
So you're saying the champion on SmackDown, them being on SmackDown, them being the champion on SmackDown is their test run for
where the Intercontinental Champion used to be.
Okay.
So I think where the Money in the Bank has to go next year is a SmackDown guy and
Hmm.
cash in on whoever the champion is, whether it's Daniel Bryan, The Miz, AJ Styles, or Samoa Joe, or whoever it's going to be. But if it's another failed cash in, it's buried. It's done. Don't do it
Well,
anymore. You ruined it. It's done.
right.
And especially where this year it was a failed cash in because the match ended in a no contest. What kind of BS is that? That the
It's
match ends on a no
It's them
contest.
spinning their wheels. I feel, I was going to mention this earlier when you said this. So we had Brock Lesnar come out, which was pretty cool. He made his return, especially because nobody really knows what's going on with him.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows if he's legitimately going back to UFC to fight. For anybody who follows MMA and UFC, you saw John Jones come off of his suspension. So is DC going to fight John Jones? Is he going to fight Brock Lesnar? Is Brock Lesnar going to the UFC? Is he staying with WWE? Nobody really knows any of this stuff except for Brock Lesnar, probably Vince McMahon, Dana White, and maybe Paul Heyman, right?
Right.
So he comes back, he comes down to the ring, he rips the cage off the door. All right, makes for a cool moment, but at the end of the day, like I keep stressing, you are pissing off your fans when you don't deliver. They didn't deliver in the ring. Again, that match was okay at best. The crowd was certainly not into
Meltzer
it.
gave it, I think, 3.5 or 3.25 stars.
Whatever you want to give, whatever score you want to give that match, it did not live up to the hype, even if there was any hype, because frankly I wasn't even really too invested in the match to begin with. You had Brock come out, you had the Shield come out, you had McIntyre and Ziggler come out, all these smoke and mirrors just to send the fans home somewhat happy, and another distraction from what's going on in the ring.
I
It's like going back to that ex-girlfriend. They keep going back to the same thing. I feel like we've seen Strowman, Roman, Brock Lesnar, and hogging up the main event on Monday Night Raw for like 2 years now. Just a continuous cycle, going back to it, going back to it, going back to us. Move on from it. Now Crown Jewel is in November, and we got to see the same thing again.
Well, hopefully this is the payoff to this whole thing because now it's a triple threat match between Braun, Brock, and Roman. So let them have this match, pay off. Brock can maybe move on and do his UFC in January. Roman could be Universal Champion, and Braun, maybe he's not the one that takes the pin. Maybe Roman pins Brock. Braun gets protected because he's not the one getting pinned. And maybe he goes after Seth Rollins and becomes Intercontinental Champion. And that's a way to test him as a guy that could be a champion. Sometimes, you know, a wrestler does not necessarily have to be a champion to be successful.
No.
Look how long The Undertaker went without being a champion. Yes, he had the quick championship win in 1991. But the belt was, he lost to Hogan and then the belt was relinquished and then Ric Flair had the best Royal Rumble ever. He didn't win the championship again until WrestleMania 13. Yeah.
And look at
5 years later.
Not even too long ago. Look what Daniel Bryan did. He was not a champion. He didn't win the Royal Rumble, and he got massively over with the fans with one of the largest movements in recent history. So you're right. Somebody does not need a title, whether it's the Intercontinental title or the Universal Championship, whatever. They don't need that to get over. It's just kind of one of those things, right place, right time. I just want the WWE to either get behind Strowman, give him the belt, give him a legitimate run, let's see what the guy can do, or just move on from the whole thing and put some fresh faces in the main event. Because at this point, it's the same thing week after week. It's the same layout, pay-per-view after pay-per-view. The fans are going to start to get a little disgruntled, and they're going to stop watching or just, tune out altogether. I don't know.
So at the end of the day,
yep.
Last question before the end of the segment. If you want a fresh new face in the main event,
you're going to put me on the spot.
Who do you want? Roman? Let's assume Roman's going to win the triple threat match.
Right.
Who do you want him in his first feud? Finally away from Braun, finally away from Brock.
I would love to see Seth Rollins, one, because I think he's earned it. I think he is one of the more over guys. I would certainly turn him heel because I think he's a better heel than he is a face. I think he should have been the guy that was put in this position going back several months. I thought he was the hottest guy on Raw, aside from maybe Strowman. I thought he was having the best matches on Raw. I think he's already been in that spot, and he's proven he can carry the belt and be successful and get over and all that other stuff that comes with being a champion. A lot of guys on Monday Night Raw are unproven. McIntyre's not proven. Ziggler's kind of old news, damaged goods. He hasn't been the champion or put in the main event spot for quite some time. Finn Balor's just kind of floating around out there. Elias, they've got all these guys, but they're scared to get behind them. At least Seth Rollins has proven he can carry the belt and be a good heel, a good face. That's who I would want to see.
Well, I'm going to disagree. I'm with Vince in the regard that you don't want to do a face versus face. I think Seth Rollins is a better face than he is a heel. You know, I think his run when he was the heel champion, I think was decent, but it could have been better. I think his current run right now as a face is much better than his run as a heel. So I don't want to do Roman versus Seth for his first feud, especially if Roman's going to be going over in that feud.
Mm-hmm.
McIntyre, as you said, is not proven yet, but I think can be a proven commodity if you put him in the first feud after all is said and done. So I would rather see McIntyre than Seth Rollins in that regard, because I think Roman does better in the ring with guys that are bigger, like a Brock, like a Strowman, like a McIntyre, than he does with a guy like Seth Rollins and Finn Balor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they'll have better matches than he would with Seth Rollins. But at the end of the day, probably going to see Roman Reigns champion until WrestleMania, so it doesn't even matter who we're putting in.
So who
there.
do you want?
I think McIntyre.
Okay.
I think McIntyre. But what do you guys think? Is the Money in the Bank contract ruined after what we saw in Hell in a Cell? Vote on the poll above my head. Give us comments on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram using the hashtag SCPB podcast. Let's get that right this time. Where does Mankind versus The Undertaker rank among the best Hell in a Cell matches? Watch the video on the screen now to see what we think. And of course, click that logo to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and follow us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast.